The house was quieter than Sarah had ever remembered, a strange stillness that seemed to follow her from room to room, pressing against her chest and making each step feel heavier. It had been 3 months since Mark's stroke, 3 months since her lively, charming husband had become someone she hardly recognized, someone who now struggled to speak, to move, to smile in the way he once had, leaving her alone with the echoes of the man she loved and the memories of their laughter. Every morning, she woke before him, careful not to disturb his rest, preparing breakfast, arranging his medications, and making the bed just the way he liked it, her movements automatic, practiced, almost robotic, but inside, her heart ached. She remembered the way he used to greet her with a teasing smile, the way his voice carried warmth and humor even on bad days, the way their home had once felt full of life and possibilities. Now, even when he tried to respond, the words were slow, the sentences broken, and she would have to finish them for him, feeling a mix of sadness, frustration, and guilt with every attempt. Nights were the worst. When the sun went down and the house slipped into darkness, the quiet became deafening, and she would sit alone in the living room, holding a cup of tea that had long since gone cold, staring at the shadows on the walls, wondering if she was losing herself in the endless routine of caregiving. She missed the little things most, the accidental touches as they passed in the hallway, the shared jokes over morning coffee, the comfort of knowing someone across the room understood her without words. Now, even the sound of Mark breathing felt like a reminder of everything that had changed. Friends called sometimes, asking how he was, how she was, but their words never reached the depth of what she felt. They didn't see the silent battles she fought every hour, the exhaustion that weighed on her body and spirit, the lonely tears she shed when no one was watching. Meals had become a chore rather than a pleasure. Conversations were mostly about therapies and doctor's appointments, and the walls of her home seemed to close in, carrying the heavy scent of antiseptic and tiredness. Even the sunlight streaming through the windows didn't lift her spirits the way it once had. It highlighted the emptiness instead, throwing shadows across the furniture, across her face, and across the space where life used to be easy and filled with laughter. She caught herself sometimes staring at old photographs, Mark with a huge grin on a beach, the family gathered around the Christmas tree, her hand in his as they walked through a park, and she wondered how quickly everything had shifted from joy to struggle, from love to caregiving, from partnership to obligation. She tried to distract herself with chores, with television, with small walks around the garden, but the sense of loss clung to her like a shadow. There was a part of her that wanted to scream, to run, to escape, but guilt always stopped her. She loved Mark, and he needed her, and how could she even consider feeling unhappy when he had lost so much? And yet, despite the sense of duty, the sorrow was relentless. Even when she helped him eat or guided his hands in exercises, she felt an emptiness that no amount of caring could fill. The nights were longer than the days. The moments of silence stretched between them, filled with things unsaid, wishes unspoken, longing for closeness that had been replaced by distance and incapacity. She remembered how he used to joke about little things, how they used to plan trips and dream about their future together, and she felt a pang of grief that was almost physical. It wasn't just the stroke that had changed things. It was the loss of shared experience, of intimacy, of connection, of laughter that had once flowed effortlessly between them. She sometimes wondered if Mark felt the same way, trapped inside his own body, unable to express the thoughts he wanted to, frustrated by words that would not come, by muscles that refused to respond, by the quiet that had become their life. She had to remind herself to eat, to sleep, to take care of herself, yet every moment seemed to revolve around him, his needs, his comfort, his recovery. Sarah also noticed how the smallest gestures became monumental. A smile from him, a moment of recognition, a laugh at something trivial, could lift her spirits for hours, even though the house still felt overwhelmingly lonely. Yet even those moments were fleeting, and they left her craving more, hungering for a connection that no longer came naturally, that required effort and patience and faith she wasn't sure she had enough of. The days blurred together. Therapy appointments, doctor visits, meals, medications, short walks, exercises, rest, repeat. And she found herself longing not just for the past, but for a future that felt impossible to imagine. A life where joy and spontaneity could exist alongside the hard reality of Mark's condition. There were times when she caught herself holding back tears in front of him, when she forced smiles that didn't reach her eyes, when she whispered prayers to herself that someone, anyone, would understand the loneliness and fatigue she carried in silence. And still, amidst all the sadness and longing, she tried to find fragments of hope, tiny sparks that reminded her that life wasn't entirely gone, that love wasn't entirely lost, that she could endure this new reality even if it was far harder than anything she had ever faced. But the truth was, deep in her heart, Sarah felt lost. She didn't know if the love that had once defined her marriage could survive the quiet desperation, the endless caregiving, the distance between who Mark had been and who he had become. And as she looked at him in his chair, his eyes meeting hers with a faint flicker of recognition, she wondered if anyone else in the world could understand the heaviness she felt, the mixture of devotion, grief, loneliness, and longing that had come to define her every day. The silence in the house wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the absence of connection, the absence of the life she had imagined, and it pressed down on her relentlessly. And yet, even in the crushing weight of that silence, Sarah felt the smallest flicker of determination, that somehow she would survive. Somehow she would keep loving. Somehow she would find light in the darkness, even if it had to come from the tiniest source, and she didn't yet know that source was about to appear in the form of her son, Ethan, whose presence would soon bring a warmth back into her life that she had almost forgotten existed. Amid the quiet heaviness of the house, there was one spark that refused to fade, her son, Ethan. 16, tall for his age, with an easy smile and a laugh that could fill a room. He had inherited Mark's mischievous humor and Sarah's gentle empathy, and he noticed things she tried to hide from the world. One afternoon, when Sarah was wiping counters for what felt like the 100th time and her chest ached from exhaustion, Ethan bounded into the kitchen, arms wide, insisting she stop what she was doing and play a game with him. At first, she hesitated, thinking about Mark's next therapy session, the bills she hadn't paid, the never-ending chores, but something in Ethan's bright eyes broke through her tired resolve. She smiled weakly and agreed, and for the first time in months, laughter filled the house. They spread out the board game on the living room carpet, pieces scattered, dice clattering, and for hours, Ethan teased, joked, and laughed with her in a way that made the walls of her home feel less like a prison. Sarah realized she had forgotten how heavy her heart had been, how isolated she had felt, how lonely the silence around Mark had become. And yet here was this boy, her son, reminding her that life could still hold joy. He told her about school, about friends, about little victories he had achieved in class, about the funny things that happened during lunch. And Sarah listened, sometimes laughing, sometimes wiping away tears she didn't realize had formed. The house seemed warmer, lighter, as if his energy was contagious, sweeping away the shadows that had settled in every corner. Ethan even noticed when she was too quiet, too subdued, and nudged her gently, asking her to talk, to share, to allow herself a moment to be happy without guilt. She remembered that she had once been capable of feeling that way, of being just Sarah, not only Mark's caretaker, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the stirrings of hope. But the joy was bittersweet. She looked at Mark across the room, quietly sitting in his chair, eyes flicking toward them occasionally, and guilt washed over her. She loved him, she truly did, but she couldn't deny that the house felt heavier with his absence, with the distance between who he had been and who he had become. Ethan seemed to sense her mixed emotions. At one point, he sat beside her on the floor, nudging her hand with his, saying softly, "Mom, it's okay to laugh. It's okay to feel good too." The simplicity of his words hit her harder than she expected. No judgment, no expectations, just pure, loving encouragement. That day, as they played and laughed until the sun dipped low in the sky, Sarah felt a kind of release she hadn't experienced since the stroke had changed their lives. She realized that in Ethan's company, she could let down the walls she had built, could breathe again, could allow herself to enjoy life even when it felt like everything else had shifted. After the game, Ethan insisted on making a snack together, and Sarah found herself teaching him small cooking tricks, enjoying his curiosity, his humor, his ease. She noticed tiny gestures, how he poured her tea with care, how he shared a piece of chocolate first with her before himself, how he kept checking if she was smiling. That made her heart swell with affection, with the warm, grounding feeling of being seen and appreciated. It wasn't romantic, but it carried an emotional intimacy that she had forgotten she could feel with someone. She began to notice little things in the home differently. The sunlight through the curtains now seemed golden instead of harsh. The scent of dinner cooking felt comforting rather than just routine. The ticking clock sounded less oppressive. And even Mark's quiet presence no longer felt entirely sad because Ethan's laughter acted as a shield against despair. Nights became moments of reflection, where Sarah would lie awake after Ethan had gone to bed, replaying their shared smiles, their jokes, and their small victories, allowing herself to feel alive again without guilt. She realized that her son had become not just a comfort, but a lifeline, a reason to experience happiness again, to feel human, to remember that life could hold moments of warmth and joy despite hardship. Yet, in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the awareness of Mark's needs, of the fragility of their world, and she often found herself torn between the sadness of what had been lost and the sweetness of what she could still experience. It was a delicate balance, moments of play, laughter, and light intertwined with the constant weight of responsibility, grief, and longing. But Sarah learned that small joys mattered, that a shared laugh with her son could bring temporary relief from the shadow of sorrow. That connection could exist even when circumstances were difficult. Ethan's energy inspired her to try little things. She started keeping a journal, jotting down fleeting moments of happiness, little victories in Mark's recovery, things that made her smile, and she noticed that focusing on these small details made her feel more in control of her emotions. She even began to invite Mark to watch the game sometimes, gently encouraging him to smile or react, celebrating even the tiniest gestures of recognition, and in those moments, Sarah felt a fragile but real thread connecting them all. Through Ethan, she remembered that love could take many forms, not just romantic, but nurturing, playful, and familial, and that it could exist even in imperfect, challenging circumstances. Every laugh, every shared story, every quiet hug reminded her that she was not alone, that life still had gifts to offer, and that she could survive the sadness without losing herself entirely. And so, the days began to pass with a rhythm she hadn't known in months. Mornings of duty and care, afternoons of small joy with Ethan, evenings of quiet reflection and hope, a fragile but growing belief that life could hold moments of light even in the shadow of Mark's illness. By the end of that week, Sarah realized she had not just survived, she had felt alive again, and she knew deep down that her son's laughter, his presence, and his love had rekindled something in her heart she thought had been lost forever, a spark that could carry her through the long, quiet nights ahead. And she also sensed that the bond between mother and son had grown stronger than ever, forming a safe harbor in the storm of life, a place where she could breathe, smile, and quietly hope for brighter days, even amidst the challenges that lay ahead. The rainy evening brought a quiet intimacy that the house hadn't felt in months, and Sarah found herself sitting by the window, listening to the soft patter of drops against the glass, feeling the weight of the day's exhaustion settle in her bones. Mark was resting after his therapy session, his hands folded in his lap, and for once, Sarah allowed herself a deep sigh, a moment to simply exist without rushing to care for someone else. Ethan, sensing the rare pause, tugged at her sleeve and suggested they step out under the covered porch to watch the rain, insisting it would be fun, a small adventure in their otherwise routine days. At first, she hesitated, worried about the chill, worried about Mark, worried about losing herself in frivolity, but his bright grin and eager eyes drew her along. As they stepped onto the porch, the smell of wet earth and the sound of rain hitting the roof created a peaceful cocoon around them, and Sarah felt her tension ease just a little. Ethan began to talk, not about school or friends this time, but about his dreams, his frustrations, the little things that made him wonder about the world. And Sarah listened, captivated not just by his words, but by the openness and warmth he radiated. He noticed the lines of fatigue on her face, the way her shoulders slumped slightly, and he reached out, holding her hand gently, his touch innocent yet comforting, and she felt a strange stir of emotion she hadn't anticipated. A mixture of gratitude, longing, and the aching need to feel understood in a way that went beyond caregiving. For a brief, suspended moment, she allowed herself to feel seen as Sarah, not only as Mark's wife or Ethan's mother, but as a woman whose heart still had room for emotion, connection, and the small joys that had been absent from her life for so long. The rain fell harder, drumming against the porch roof, and Ethan pulled a small chair close so they could sit side by side, sharing the view, sharing quiet conversation, sharing laughter over small jokes that reminded her of lighter days before illness had reshaped their world. It was in that gentle intimacy, that emotional closeness, that Sarah realized she had been craving human warmth in ways she hadn't admitted to herself, and it frightened her because she loved Mark and felt guilty for even noticing the comfort she felt with Ethan's attention. But at the same time, it awakened something she had long suppressed, a sense of vitality, of emotional connection, of being valued not just for what she did, but for who she was. As they talked, Ethan shared a story about a funny misunderstanding at school, and Sarah laughed out loud, the sound ringing clear and free, and she felt the walls inside her chest shift, making room for joy even in the shadow of sorrow. She found herself telling him things she hadn't said aloud in months, about how lonely she felt sometimes, how heavy her days were, how difficult it was to watch Mark struggle, and Ethan listened, really listened, without judgment, offering only empathy and encouragement, his presence a balm to her aching spirit. And though their closeness was innocent, it also stirred a complicated mix of emotions: guilt for feeling alive and happy while Mark suffered, longing for affection that had been absent, and a quiet, unsettling awareness that human hearts could ache for connection even in impossible circumstances. The rain slowed, leaving a fresh, clean scent in the air, and Sarah felt a sense of clarity in the silence that followed. She realized she was not alone in her emotional journey. Ethan had become a companion, a confidant, a source of laughter and understanding that reminded her of life outside of sorrow. She watched him as he talked, gestured, smiled, and she felt an emotional warmth that both comforted and unsettled her, a reminder that she could still feel deeply, still care, still be human, even when her life was filled with challenges. That evening, as they returned inside, Sarah tucked Ethan in as he chattered about future plans, his words light but full of earnest hope, and she realized that his presence had become a tether, keeping her anchored in the small joys of life, even when the world felt heavy and uncertain. Alone in her room afterward, she reflected on the complexity of her emotions, the delicate balance between love, duty, and longing, the way her heart could still respond to care and kindness without betraying the vows she had made, and she understood that this bond with her son was not just comforting, but essential, a lifeline that allowed her to navigate the darkness with some measure of grace and resilience. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel happiness without shame, to feel relief without guilt, to accept that love could take many forms, nurturing, playful, emotional, and that it could coexist with grief, responsibility, and loyalty. She recognized that the path ahead would be complicated, that her feelings might confuse her, that the pull of longing could make her question herself, but she also saw the potential for growth, for connection, for moments of light in an otherwise heavy world. In those hours, Sarah began to understand that life did not have to be a series of sacrifices alone, that joy could be found even in small things, and that her son's warmth and presence had awakened a side of her she feared lost forever, a side capable of laughter, of emotional intimacy, of hope. And while Mark remained at the center of her responsibilities, the bond she shared with Ethan provided a new perspective, that love could endure, could expand, could take unexpected shapes, and that finding solace and joy in this relationship did not diminish her devotion, but strengthened her resilience. As she turned off the light that night, she felt a quiet resolve settle over her, a determination to nurture both her responsibilities and her heart, to embrace the moments of connection that appeared unexpectedly, and to allow herself to live fully, even amidst hardship. She knew challenges lay ahead, that difficult days would return, that the weight of care and sadness would not vanish, but she also knew she had discovered something precious: the simple, profound power of being truly seen, truly heard, and truly loved in the innocent, unwavering presence of her son, and that realization gave her a fragile but real sense of hope, a reminder that even in life's darkest storms, a small spark could light the way forward. And she drifted to sleep that night with a heart both heavy and full, ready to face the next day with courage, care, and an openness she hadn't felt in a long time. Weeks passed, and Sarah slowly discovered a fragile rhythm in life, a rhythm that allowed moments of joy to coexist with the heavy weight of responsibility, a delicate balance between caring for Mark and cherishing the warmth that Ethan brought into her world. Each morning began with the familiar routines, preparing breakfast, administering medications, guiding Mark through exercises. But now, instead of sinking into exhaustion and despair, Sarah allowed herself small pockets of light. The smile on Ethan's face as he hurried down the stairs, the way he insisted on helping her carry dishes or fold laundry, the little jokes he made to cheer her even before she had fully woken. Their afternoons became sacred, times for connection, whether it was watching the sunlight dance through the windows, sharing a story, playing a quiet game, or just sitting together in comfortable silence while the rain pattered outside. Sarah began to notice subtle changes in herself. Her laughter came more easily, her smiles lasted longer. Her chest felt lighter when she returned Ethan's teasing glances or joined him in playful antics. Even her care for Mark took on a renewed tenderness, as if she could pour more love into her actions when her heart was not solely weighed down by sorrow. She found that she could rejoice in little victories, Mark pronouncing a word more clearly, completing a physical exercise without strain, showing a flicker of recognition when she entered the room, without letting the moments of joy she shared with Ethan feel like a betrayal. That balance, delicate as it was, gave her hope, the kind that quietly whispered that life could be meaningful and beautiful even after tragedy. Sarah also began reaching out beyond the walls of the home, reconnecting with friends she had drifted from, joining support groups for spouses of stroke survivors, and slowly rebuilding the social ties that reminded her she was more than her roles as wife and mother. In these interactions, she realized that sharing her feelings, her grief, and her tiny victories lifted some of the isolation she had carried, and she noticed that the burden of sadness became lighter when she allowed others to enter her emotional world. One evening, as she returned home after a support meeting, she found Ethan waiting with a small stack of drawings he had made for her, each colorful page a testament to his thoughtfulness and his desire to bring light into her life. She hugged him tightly, her heart full, and whispered her gratitude, realizing that he had been her anchor in ways she could never fully explain. Slowly, Sarah also allowed herself to pursue the hobbies she had abandoned, reading again, tending to her small garden, even experimenting with cooking new recipes, finding that these simple pleasures nourished her soul and gave her confidence that life could be more than just caregiving and sadness. Mark's condition remained a challenge, of course, and some days were harder than others. Moments of frustration and grief still arose, and Sarah had to navigate her exhaustion and emotional pain carefully. Yet the presence of Ethan, his laughter, his curiosity, his gentle encouragement, gave her strength she hadn't known she could summon, reminding her that happiness was not selfish, that joy could exist alongside duty, and that love could take many forms without diminishing the bond she shared with her husband. The bond with her son also opened Sarah's heart to other forms of emotional connection. She began to notice small gestures from friends, neighbors, and even casual acquaintances with renewed appreciation, feeling that the world was not as isolating as it had seemed in the first months of Mark's illness. She started to embrace vulnerability in a way she hadn't before, allowing herself to ask for help, to accept compliments, and to savor fleeting moments of beauty. A flower blooming in the garden, a bird landing on the porch, a warm breeze drifting through the window, and in those moments, she felt alive again, aware that life, though altered, still had meaning. One quiet night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Sarah sat in the living room with Mark, holding his hand and recounting the day's events, sharing a laugh over Ethan's antics, and feeling a deep, unspoken connection with both of them. She realized that love had not vanished. It had transformed, adapting to new circumstances, expanding to include resilience, patience, empathy, and an openness to small joys that could sustain her through hardship. The house, once heavy with silence and sorrow, now carried echoes of laughter, whispers of shared stories, and the comforting rhythm of daily life that balanced responsibility with tenderness. Sarah recognized that her journey was far from over, that challenges would return, that setbacks were inevitable, and that the emotional landscape would continue to shift. But she also knew she had discovered a way to live fully, to embrace connection, and to hold hope in her heart, despite the difficulties that remained. In the quiet moments before sleep, she reflected on the profound lesson she had learned, that life after tragedy need not be entirely bleak, that the love of a child, the shared laughter, the small victories, and the acts of kindness around her could restore a sense of purpose and joy. That night, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for Ethan's presence, for Mark's perseverance, for her own ability to endure and adapt, and for the fragile yet powerful hope that had returned to her life. She knew that tomorrow would bring more challenges, more hard moments, and more decisions, but she also felt a renewed belief that happiness was possible, that love could be sustained in many forms, and that even in the shadow of illness and change, life could offer moments of beauty, connection, and emotional fulfillment. And as she finally closed her eyes, she felt a sense of calm, a delicate balance between duty and joy, sorrow and laughter, despair and hope, understanding that she had learned to live again, to find light in the darkness, and to hold on to the precious, sustaining bond that her son had reminded her was always there, waiting to guide her through the toughest days, giving her courage to face whatever came next with love, resilience, and a heart open to life's unexpected gifts.